For decades, the island had lived in the long shadow of its past. Old borders, old grievances, old promises left unfulfilled. And then, without warning, the fragile balance shattered. What began as a dispute over a small stretch of land spiraled into the largest military confrontation the island had seen in generations. Armies mobilized, borders closed, alliances cracked, and within days, two nations found themselves locked in a conflict neither had planned for, yet both were willing to fight. At dawn on June 27th, Northern Ireland launched a coordinated strike in the Ballyshannon and Ballintra sectors, sealing off access routes into the Donegal-Lifford region. For the first time in decades, armored columns rolled across roads long considered stable. Ireland responded within hours, declaring mobilization. Across the Irish Sea, the United Kingdom dispatched reinforcements. Divisions moved toward the border as political leaders exchanged ultimatums. London demanded the immediate halt of Irish mobilization. Dublin countered with its own conditions: the complete withdrawal of British forces from Irish territory before any negotiations could begin. Tensions erupted into violence on June 29th when British forces encircled and disarmed an isolated Irish division at Mallyrow. To stifle further mobilization, British units launched assaults toward Strandhill and Sligo. Their advance stalled only thanks to last-minute Irish reinforcements, and by July 6 the battle lines hardened. The elite withdrawal of British forces from Irish territory before any negotiations could begin. Yet the push west was only a decoy. That same morning, elite British divisions surged south along the Belfast-Dublin highway. Their objective was surgical and ruthless: reach Dublin before organized resistance could form, seize government buildings, and topple the Irish administration. British commandos and assault units poured into the freshly secured bridgehead, preparing for a decisive strike. Their initial attempt to storm Dublin failed, and a subsequent effort to encircle the city met stiff resistance. On July 19th, Irish reinforcements halted the maneuver. Days later, under the cover of night on July 22nd, Ireland launched a bold counter-operation, severing British supply lines by July 23rd. Cut off on land, British forces clung to their coastal lifeline, receiving supplies only by sea. Britain escalated further, imposing a naval blockade that isolated Ireland from the world. International condemnation grew. UN and Council of Europe resolutions followed on July 20th and 22nd. The United States dispatched naval forces to the region in an attempt to cool down the spiraling crisis. Diplomatic ties between Ireland and the UK collapsed on July 10th. The next day, NATO held an emergency summit condemning a conflict within its own membership. Fierce battles raged along the front through late July. On July 26th, British attempts to re-establish land contact with their Dublin enclave failed. By August 1st, Irish forces pulled back to more defensible positions. That same day, nearly all of Donegal-Lifford fell under British control with minimal resistance, except for the rugged western hills where guerrilla activity threatened any occupation effort. By early August, both nations faced sweeping sanctions and suspensions from major international organizations, including NATO itself. NATO allies began drafting intervention plans to forcibly restore peace, if necessary. A fragile armistice emerged after several rounds of negotiations. Fighting diminished, except for sporadic engagements. Irish forces slowly pushed British troops out of Dublin's suburbs as Britain's supply situation worsened. On September 14th, in a sudden and brutal strike, British troops ambushed the Irish 14th Division near Dundalk, forcing its surrender. The psychological blow was immense. Britain gained momentum, launching a new offensive near Carrickmacross on September 21st. Irish commanders ordered tactical withdrawals to shorten their defensive line, counterattacking only where opportunities allowed. By late October, British troops around Dublin faced dwindling supplies and relentless Irish artillery bombardment. Despite this, London refused to withdraw, still clinging to hopes of a decisive breakthrough. From November 3rd to 8th, amphibious forces massed offshore. At dawn on November 8th, British troops landed along the southeastern and southern coasts. Irish defenses there were thin. Most of their forces remained concentrated in the north. Newly mobilized civilian units were rushed to the region. A wide British beachhead formed near Wicklow, and an armored advance toward Dublin began, only to be halted at the capital's southern approaches. Simultaneously, British forces attempted to envelop the city from the west. On November 27th, another British landing struck near Milltown Malbay. Within hours, British units surged inland, targeting major military depots. The next day, a massive pincer offensive from the south and west attempted to seize control of Ireland's Central Road network. On December 1st, British forces converged near Portlaoise and advanced toward Tullamore. The Irish defense began to collapse. Reserves were depleted, morale crumbled, and supply routes were severed. By early December, large swaths of the south and west were cut off. On December 6th, the Irish government resigned and was taken into custody. 2 days later, the newly formed Irish Anti-Crisis Committee declared a unilateral ceasefire and called for negotiations. On December 10th, both sides announced a peace agreement. British withdrawal began immediately. Northern Ireland assumed temporary control of disputed territories pending a future referendum and settlement.